about 8:10 or so, but we'll get going with the early items. Good morning, Doug.
We should call him DJ. Doug Johnson, DJ.
Oh, that's a good idea. I like that.
Always saying, Doug Johnson, this is for you.
But we don't call you Doug, we call you York.
Yeah, we call me DY, I don't care.
Okay, I think our whole team is ready. Is there anybody that we're waiting for? Director Schmidt. I just gave an announcement to everybody. Vice Chair Watchman is moving as quickly as he can to find a Wi-Fi spot. He also will be joining Michelle in Window Rock. And as we all know, driving through some of those regions, it could be a bit spotty. So we'll move forward, and Vice Chair Watchman should join us in about 10 minutes. And so if I can get a go-ahead from staff, I will call the meeting to order.
It looks like we're all here.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. We'll dive into agenda item number 1A, call for quorum. It is 8:01 a.m. on Tuesday, September 21st, 2021. I call this meeting of the Independent Redistricting Commission to order. For the record, the Executive Assistant, Valerie Newman, will be taking roll. When your name is called, please indicate you are present. If you're unable to respond verbally, we ask that you please type your name. Val.
Commissioner Lerner. Present. Commissioner Meal.
Present.
Commissioner York.
Present.
And Chairperson Newberg.
Present.
And we are expecting Vice Chair Watchman at some point.
Okay.
And then for the record, we have Executive Director Brian Schmidt, Deputy Director Lori Van Haren, Public Information Officer Michelle Crank. We'll have Community Outreach Coordinator Marie Chappell online, along with Alex Pena. Our legal team, which consists of Brett Johnson, Eric Spencer from Snell and Wilmer, Roy Herrera, I believe Jillian Andrews, and Daniel Ariano from Ballard Spar. Our mapping consultants, Mark Flahan from Timmins, Doug Johnson from MDC Research, Ivy Beller-Sikansky from NDC Research, and then our transcriptionist, Angela Miller. That should be everyone.
Okay, thank you, and welcome, and thank you, team. Please note for the minutes that a quorum is present. Agenda item 1B, call for notice. Val, was the notice and agenda for the commission meeting properly posted 48 hours in advance of today's meeting?
Yes, it was, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2, approval of minutes from September 14th, 2021. We have just the general session. There was no executive session. Is there any discussion on the minutes? There's no discussion. I'll entertain a motion to approve the general session minutes from September 14th.
This is Commissioner Lerner. I move to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
Commissioner York, second.
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Meal went first, so for the transcription, please note that Commissioner Meal seconded. We'll vie for quickness next time. If there's no further discussion, we'll do a vote. Commissioner Meal.
Aye.
Commissioner Lerner.
Aye.
Commissioner York.
Aye.
Commissioner Newberg is an aye. With a 4-0 vote, the minutes are passed. Thank you. We'll move to agenda item number 3, opportunity for public comment. Public comment will now open for a minimum of 30 minutes and remain open until the adjournment of the meeting. Comments will only be accepted electronically in writing on the link provided in the notice and agenda for the public meeting and will be limited to 3,000 characters. Please note, members of the commission may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to any criticism, or scheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date. And with that, we will move to agenda item number 4, discussion on public comments received prior to today's meeting. I have a few things to note, but as normal, I open it up to my colleagues first, please.
Well, this is Commissioner Lerner. The only thing I'll mention, I know there were a number of other comments, but on I know there's still some concern from the public about mapping and being able to submit and accessibility and all. So I think we'll probably, I guess I'll ask Chair Newberg about this, whether this is an appropriate time to ask for feedback or whether we can do that when we get our update from the mapping consultants. Perhaps we can address some of the questions that were raised by the public. I don't want you to think we're not looking at those, but I don't know what the appropriate time is. Chair Newberg, what would you suggest?
Let me ask Doug and Mark if you're comfortable. I'm just checking the language of our agenda and making sure that I believe that it's maybe legal can chime in on this. Well, because right now it's in the agenda, it's updates on mapping software, updates on racial polarization report and demographic and competitive measures. So in terms of having mapping respond to public comment, I defer to council.
I think it depends on Commissioner Lerner on what the public comments questions or the public comment related questions are. If you feel as though they're related enough to the 2 topics that are listed under the Timmons agenda, we can wait until that agenda item. If not, then I think right now would be the appropriate time, of course, subject to Timmons' availability to answer.
Yeah. And Commissioner Lerner, I think what you were trying to get at was that there was concerns about the ability of the public to be able to issue maps using the software. So based off of what I'm reading, then it's underneath Roman numeral 5A that would be appropriate.
Okay, then I'll hold on the comments on any feedback on the public or comments on the public comments until that time, and then we can discuss them. That was my only comment, Chair Newberg.
Okay, thank you. And I along those lines, I mean, I think the most important thing is to reassure the public that there absolutely are and will continue to be ways to submit maps in the old-fashioned ways. I mean, you know, we're capable of understanding data in many, many different formats, and we will work with mapping on how that will be presented. So stay tuned with 5A. Any other comments from my colleagues? Okay. Just a few quick things, you know, some additional questions about our outreach efforts. Our Deputy Director will be giving an update in today's public meetings. Our efforts are, you know, have really picked up, and I'd say they're quite robust and very effective. Public records. We are aware that there are some outstanding public records. Please know that the migration is ongoing now. We are going through the records, and you should be hearing from us very shortly. We are very committed to transparency, disclosure, and, you know, as soon as we can get the system up and running, like I said, which is, it is, and we're going through the records as we speak, it will become much quicker in the future. So finally, again, ongoing questions about access to mapping consultants. Again, I'd like to just reassure the public, no one is discussing anything with mapping outside of logistical scheduling and learning a software program. Zero mapping will be done privately. 100% of the mapping will be done in public session. No one in the public has the, you know, authority to direct mapping, to draft any maps, and the commissioners are not going to be privately directing mapping to create maps. So we're all in the same boat. If there's no other comment, we'll move to agenda item number 5. Okay, update from mapping consultants, Timmins NDC, and I turn it over to Mark and Doug. Mark, you're on mute.
A comment of 2021. Good morning, everybody on the commission. Appreciate your time today. We got a bunch of updates on the mapping software that I will show you live on the screen and sort of do a dive into the software. The first thing that I want to bring up is the Redistricting Hub. And let me share my screen with you. Okay, you guys should be able to see the hub now. You've seen this page a bunch of times, but what I want to show is the new addition here is if you go down to the redistricting system on the home page, you can see right now we have 3 plans submitted. We have built in some capability to allow the public to be able to explore any of the submitted plans. You don't need a login, it's totally open. So if you click on the view submitted plans, it will load this page, and the first part of the page is a breakdown of the plans submitted. So here's the 3 plans. You can see a pie chart over here that has 1 congressional and 2 legislative. If you want to click on the pie chart to sort of sort the list on the right-hand side, you can. We did send 1 test plan through to make sure that it was working correctly. If you want to dive into one plan, say we want to dive into this one, we can come down here to the actual application and we can launch the application. And this is what the application looks like. And you can see on the right-hand side, here is all of the submitted map plans that have been put through the redistricting system. So if we want to look at this very first one, that's LD001, you can hit add. And here's exactly what it looks like on the map. You can interact with it. You can easily zoom in to start to see the boundaries of it. You can see we have our township median here. You can click on it and get information about it. You can get the total population in there, deviation. So you can see this district was a little short on deviation. So that way it's out there. Anybody can come and view what has been submitted to through the system. Our goal is to have this turned around in 1 to 2 business days once somebody submits their plan. If I go back to this first screen here, you can also click this link here that says view all submitted plans. And this is another way to go ahead and look at it. You can see the plan is submitted by the username or their email. We can see the date that it was submitted on. We can see the description of what they wanted to say. Let's use a better one. So this says the legislative district boundary between District 16 and 17 have been redrawn to assure communities. I'll go to the full page so we can finish reading it. Communities of interest are located within the district user plan objective. Nothing in particular attempted to create different rural CDs. So if you wanted to click that and view that on the map, you can also interact with it this way. If you wanted to see the data table, here it is. That is live on the hub today. You can get there really easily again by 2 different ways. If you load the home page, you scroll down to where it says the redistricting system, you can see a total plan submitted that gets updated as the data gets updated. And you can click this link that says explore submitted plans. It is also available here at the redistricting system. If you click on the redistricting system page, again, you can see explore submitted plans is here. The total number of plans submitted is there. If you click on this source, it will take you to the table. If you'd like to see the table, you can see we have the submitted plan name here. We have normalized the plan name just in numerical order for IRC. So you can see the IRC plan name here. You can see who submitted it. And you can see the description. If you just want to launch an individual plan from the table, again, you can click on the link and it will load a new page and a new tab, and it will show it on a map for you. So that is out there today. The other piece that we have in the hub that is new, we have put all of the training videos on here. This was put into IRC's YouTube channel as a playlist on Friday, and you can get to all of the training videos here. And that is everything that is new on the hub for the redistricting system. Any questions on the hub? If not, then I will jump more into the redistricting system. Okay, seeing no questions or hearing any questions, let's jump into the redistricting system. Let me share my screen again with you. Where is it? Here. Do you see the redistricting system now? Because I lost all you guys.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So a couple questions. One question that I saw that came up in a comment was, what happens if I share my plan with a group? Can multiple people edit it at the same time? The way the system works is that if I'm share my data in a group and I have two different people editing the same plan in my group, it works on the last save. So if user one saves something and user two is still doing something and then they save last, their save is going to overwrite everything user one does. So I'd recommend that you guys only use one editor going forward. So just sort of throwing that out there. The second piece that I wanted to show today is some demographics. And we will talk about more about that in the next bullet, but I also want to show, how it works in the redistricting system. So here I have loaded the template grid map for the legislative district, so we can see all the data here on the screen. If you want to get to the demographics piece, you can come over here and click demographics. And over here, there's a couple different pieces in here. If you open up the key elections data, we have multiple pieces in here. So you have comp dem votes and comp rep votes. And what this is this is the total number of votes for either the Democratic or the Republican candidate for all 9 selected elections by the commission, and what that number of votes would be for the new district you built. And Doug, hop in here anytime if you got anything to add. And if you want to turn that on, it's very easy. You can just click the buttons, you can turn on, and you can see that it adds in the table. The second piece that we got in here is down here. If you look at, you have President 2020 Republican, President 2020 Dem, and this is the total number of votes for each party per the 9 elections that the commission chose. So you can see President 2020, Senate 2020, Attorney General 2018, State Mine Inspector 2018, Secretary of State 2018, Senate 2018, State Superintendent of Education 2018, State Treasurer 2018, and then again President 2016. You can see that each of them have a Dem and a Rep. So what you can do is you can come over here and you can select it, and it will show you the total number of votes in that election from President 2020 for Republicans and Democrats in the newly elected districts that were built. So you can see the data here sitting.
And Mark, I may be jumping ahead, but are you going to show them percentages?
Yes, that was where I was getting to next.
Okay.
So the way that you can look at to see the competitiveness measures here is Doug brought in the percentage, which is the best way to do it. And if I remove the total sums, we can see the percentage of votes per district for this one election, President 2020. So if we use District 1, we can see if the election was happening with these districts back in 2020, the Republicans got 32% of the vote in that election, and the Democrats got 67% of the vote. So that's a way that you can see of the second competitiveness measure of how many times the Democrats or the Republicans won one of those 9 elections. So the easiest way to set this up is because if you come down here to the key elections data and we turn all of this on, and I'm only doing this for demo, is that the table can get really long, and sometimes you can see it gets a little cut off, so it's a tiny bit hard to read. So my recommendation would be is choose a party, whichever one you want, Republican or Democrat, and then turn off the other party. So we're only looking at one party. So in this example, if we just choose the second one, which is Dem, we can turn off the Republican percentages. Oops. And bear with me as I turn all this on. Yep, I think I got it all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yep. So the recommended path that I would do that keeps the table a little cleaner down here so we can see it is if we use District 1 for an example again, right? Here's the 9 elections, President 2020 all the way through President 2026, all for the Democrats. And this is just an example. Like I said, you can easily pick Republican. It's not a problem. We're just using this as an example. We can see in District 1 that for the 9 elections, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 that are over 50%. So for the competitiveness measures, this would come back as a 9 points for the Democrats and 0 for the Republicans, as in that the Democrats would have won the 9 elections that are shown here. Anything you want to add there, Doug?
Not to that part, but you should also put in the percentage of the comp dem vote. They can see the percentage spread.
You can do the same with the total number of votes as in the comp dem and the comp rep that we already talked about. You can see that that's here too. So using District 1, the total number of votes is 66%, and the Republican votes is 33.91%. Is that what you're looking for, Doug?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So that's the other competitive measure, that spread measure would be, in this case, 33% in that district.
Before I go off the competitiveness and go to demographics, are there any questions? Let me see if I can move the screen so I can see your faces. There we go. Any questions?
Just real quick, Doug Johnson, can you just explain again for the public that one last measure, just to make sure they understand that measure, please?
Sure. So as you know, the commission's adopted 2 measures of competitiveness. One is whether it's a swing district, and that depends on, as Mark was saying, whether those 9 elections all go for one party or the other, or if it's the district swings back and forth among those 9 elections. The other measure is just a straight, somewhat simpler, the percentage spread between the number of votes cast for the Republicans in those 9 elections versus the number of votes cast for the Democrats in those 9 elections. And the commission's kind of target ranges were twofold. One, looking for, you might call them highly competitive seats where there's 4% or less spread between the 2 parties. and then a sort of a competitive spread where there's 7% or less spread between those two parties. So District 1 that Mark was talking about, there's a 33%, 32.2% spread. Obviously, that's not a competitive seat by that measure. But District 2, feel like there's a 49.75 to 50.25. So that spread would be 0.5. So obviously, almost perfectly balanced and definitely in that 4% highly competitive spread. And as you go across on that one, you see the Dem percentages are 52, or 51 and 52. So those are Dem wins, 47.75 and 47.89, which would be Republican wins. And then it goes back and forth as you go across the list. So that's how folks can tell if a district is in the competitive by the one measure or the swing by the other measure adopted by the commission.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mark, if we set our demographics with whatever buttons we select, does it hold there so that when we look at different maps, we can quickly click on that button and have the same things, or do we have to reset it every time we open a map?
If you open a map that has set districts like this, just use the grid as an example here. It might not show automatically in the table. You might have to go to the demographics button and select it here. But once you've selected it the first time, it will hold here. And if I went to change a district, this table will update itself live as I'm changing block groups or blocks around.
Okay.
And I can probably show you that. I just need to save this map and create my own. Hold on. Okay, so this is now my own map. And this is just for demo. I'm not worrying about equal population or anything. This is just to show you that the table updates dynamically. So I'm just going to randomly pick a spot and update it. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there. Say if we want to do something here between District 13 and District 14, and I wanted to come here and say, well, I want to add some stuff to District 13. Again, not taking population or anything into account, just to show you the table updating. If I went over here and drew, oops, let's do this first. District 13 currently has 238,000 people, 383. So now that we got that number set, we can see total Republican votes is 504, 687. Let's add some data to it. And you can see that now changed. Our target deviation is different. We now have 245,328 population. You can see that the Republican votes changed from 512,183. And I think it was about 504,000 before that. And if we undo it, we can see it goes back, 504,000. So that's how that table updates dynamically as you change different blocks and block groups. Any other questions?
So Mark, this may be where one of my questions comes in from the public. And that is, if you were, because that's a good example, right? You just changed that one. So if I'm in the public and I'm looking at the grid map and I just want to change District 13, because that's where I live and that's most interesting to me. Can I, but then when you go through the review, will it allow me to submit and put a comment for just the fact that all I did was District 13? I know there's now an imbalance between 13 and 14, right? Because I did that, right? But if I don't want to do an entire map, how do I do something like that, which relates to people's communities of interest? We just ask people to give us that feedback. Now they want to actually draw a line around their community of interest and say, here's what it is. So that's where I guess my question came in from the public, but it fits really nicely with what you were just going over.
Okay, well let's do this example then. Let's let's say this is the change, right? That this little corner here is a community of interest with these people over here in District 13, and I want to be part of District 13. So we're not going to change much. We're just going to change this little corner for the example. So here's maybe my change, right, for my district, because I want 13 to look differently. You can see my target deviation's a little over. So what happens is you can come in here, and when you hit submit plan, let's save it for this example, and you hit OK to submit plan, it's going to ask you, well, one, it's going to run through the integrity checks. So give it a second. We're going to hit OK, and then you can see here, we can put in our organization in there. And we can put an explanation of plan objectives. The other thing that you can do here is before you hit submit, we can come over here to, hold on, the share tab. You can hit information and you can type an entire description in here. So in here, the description is what you're going to want to use. I modified District 13 for my community of interest. Something like that, right? Hit save. Sorry, that's a little backwards. Before you hit the submit button, hit share and go to information. I thought the description came by when you hit submit plan, and I was incorrect on that. So hit share, hit your information, add what you want here, and then go ahead and hit submit. And when you hit submit plan, again, you have another option for your plan objectives.
Commissioner Lerner, though, it is worth noting that if your changes take just District 14 out of population balance, though, so that it doesn't pass the integrity check, then you will have to make changes to District 14 to go back. So yes, you can't ignore what happens in surrounding districts. In this example, it stayed population balance, but they will have to make changes to the other district to population balance and pass those integrity tests. But they don't have to make any sense. You can always include in the notes that Mark was just showing you. I'm focused on District 13. I ignore what I did in District 14.
And Mark and Doug, let's just pretend for a minute somebody says, you know what, I just don't want to deal with that. And I'm going to come tonight to the public hearing. Two different people. One hands you their hand-drawn map of these two districts. So, and another person hands you a paragraph, a narrative of, I'd like my boundary to be I-60, north, 202 south, whatever. How do the two of you record that data, and how do we see that data? I think the public's curious about how the different buckets are presented, and really want to make sure that, how we're seeing the data, we're getting all of it.
I think that's a really good question, and Doug, hop in here if you want. But let's start on the second piece first. If somebody just submits us a paragraph, if you submit us a paragraph of what you want your district to be, please be as specific as possible, and give us boundaries that are easily relatable to something that we can find on a map, whether it's major streets or mountain ranges. If you give us just your community name, sometimes it can be hard trying to figure out exactly what the boundary is of your community name, and then it's us trying to interpret what exactly that data means and to put on a map. So the more specific that you can give us, the more accuracy that we can understand it.
And I think the key thing from the commission's perspective is that anything written or on paper will come in, get scanned, be part of the record, and be provided to the commission and provided us, and available for the commission to react to and ask to be adopted into the map. We won't be processing every piece of paper submitted into the mapping system. That'll be driven by commission requests, but it will all go into the record and into the commissioners for reading and review.
And I presume it's similar to the community of interest report where we received, all the electronic information, but we received files of just qualitative data that, in the generation of the commission, we're very accustomed. It's natural for us to read, narratives and feedback. So please, to the public, when you submit the maps, the visual maps, not on the computer, and you submit, a letter, we're reading it and we're learning.
And just as a follow-up, Chair Newberg, then I would assume then anything that's done by paper, we'll be getting that pretty rapidly versus, I know the community of interest, you compiled and put that together. But now, because of the way things are going, I assume if when people submit those will be input pretty quickly. Is that correct?
I think that rather than answer for it, that's probably a question for Brian and Lori and the team.
Yeah, that's a really great idea. And I don't see why we couldn't, create some kind of, file of but team.
Absolutely. We will get those to you all as quickly as we can.
The other piece on that question to note is that different from the community of interest survey where we waited till the end of the process and then all that was processed and provided on its website. As Mark mentioned, submitted maps will get turned around and posted to the map hub site, and our target is a day or two.
Sounds like a very dynamic process, an exciting process, an enormous source of information to the public and the commission. So thank you.
So I guess I want to go back to this one point about, and I understand why we need to do the integrity check. I'm all for it. But I'm still going back to the fact that we have a lot of folks who have community of interest who want to focus on that one. And once you do 13, let's say, if we go back to the example Mark did, now 14 has to be adjusted. Then once you do 14, you've got to do 15, and you're now creating a statewide map. And so that goes back to that same question. How is there a way for people to just say, all I want is, like, it looked like, Mark, you were able to actually submit even with a 6,000 person difference in population. I don't know what the criteria would be for somebody in a single district to be now off population to still be able to submit that.
Yeah, Mark, let me take that. The good news is that if you've taken so many people from 14 that it's out of balance, 13 is out of balance as well. So the one district they're trying to draw is out of balance as well. So they, even if they only want to draw one district, they still have to take some population out of that to make it a valid single district. So it won't, as we call it, it won't ripple through the rest of the map because they just find what they want elsewhere, what they want to take out of 13, and they have to in order to make it work as one district, and they just put that into 14. So it will be limited to just one other district, or at most two. You know, if they want to take something out on the other side, they'll have to find a way to ripple that around. But at most, they shouldn't be looking at needing to touch more than two other seats, and 90% of the time, they'll only have to touch one other seat.
Great. Thank you for explaining that. That's what I was hoping that information
Yep.
would be clear. Thank you.
And the system allows for a 10% deviation in population, either total, so 5% either above or below. So that also gives them some room, and that's why you could see that plan passed the integrity check, because back of the napkin math, I think it's 37,000 is 5% of what the legislative districts are. Don't hold me to that number. That's just off the top of my head. It's 37 or 39, I'm pretty sure. To sort of complete the thought on the plan description, when you asked me about the example for 13 and the person that just wants to do one district, I want to bring you back to the hub so we can complete that thought, because I think it'll answer some of your questions. So if you look here, you can see the plan description is also listed with the map. So you can see this one just says testing out a 9 CD map. Plan objective, nothing in particular, and this is what you put in when you submitted a plan, attempted to create different rural congressional districts. So that's where you can also see that data as the public too of what was submitted. So then if you wanted to go see it, we could go view it in here. But I wanted to complete that thought because that's the whole process so people can see where that came from.
And just a reminder to the public, not to hit that submit button unless you mean it. Because submitted maps are going public.
Yes, Doug, you also bring up a good point that once you hit submit, the redistricting system locks it down, so no one can edit it. So there's no going back once you do submit. You'd have to take that plan, save a brand new plan, make all your modifications, and resubmit it. So make sure that you're 100% sure that you want to submit the plan. You can submit as many plans as you want. So if you want to submit 10, you can do that too. There's no limitation. So.
And I want to reiterate, because this also speaks to many in the Native American lands that don't have Wi-Fi or access. You know, if you can't do this or don't have access to do it, literally draw it on a piece of paper, put it in an envelope, write down the IRC's address, it does cost a stamp, and we'll get it. And I'm not joking. It's that simple.
Just as a question, do we have a form online, like a PDF that people could use kind of as a, I don't know, like a boilerplate that would help with them knowing to remember all of the key points about lines they have to draw, the comments that they have to make? I'm all for people doing it in any way possible, but I was just wondering if something like that is also available.
Are you thinking like a checklist for how you submit a map, or are you thinking a form of what people need to send for paper submittals?
I'm thinking of paper submittals, so it could be both. It could be the checklist that goes with the paper. I mean, it could be all combined into one, I guess, is all I'm thinking, is maybe if there's a form that it says, here's all the things you have to submit, now draw your map. Something that just reminds people of what they need to do. I know you're telling people to be very specific, but not everybody, may be here right now. So if they see a form that says, here's your checklist, you could submit it on the back of this form, you could submit it on a separate piece of paper, but that checklist would probably be helpful.
We don't have anything like that that developed right now. People could hand in anything to you guys in paper. And that was the same thing with the community of interest listening tour. We had a form, but people still could hand in anything that they wanted to write or present to you guys. And I think many people did that.
And you know what, Commissioner Lerner, we can emphasize in all of our public hearings the opportunity to submit the paper. We can maybe find a spot on our website. I suggest we look into that, the staff, so that we make it easier and clearer about the very simple way of sharing data. We could do that.
Thank you.
And this is probably a good point to mention what's come up in a lot of the public comments about Dave's Redistricting and the other apps that are out there, is that anyone that draws a map with Dave's Redistricting or District R or any of those other apps or their own GIS can import those maps in. There's the import system that Mark has shown before, and that can be used to bring in any shapefile or text file that all those software packages generate. So if someone doesn't want to use this and wants to bring in a map from any of those apps, they certainly can. And it'll, once you bring it in, just hit submit in here, and it'll go through the same process and show up on the hub just like anything else.
Thanks, Doug. That was a question I had, so I appreciate you repeating that. Thank you.
Any other questions before we go to demographics?
And the only thing I'll remind, I think this is really good, very helpful additional information to clarify things, so I appreciate that, is that while we have that 10% rule that you mentioned on legislative, there is no wiggle room on congressional, so that when people are adjusting, let's say their congressional district, they're going to have to adjust to get it equal population. They don't have the same amount of room for that, just as a reminder for folks.
And Shireen, the 10% is something that is the extreme that the courts have allowed. That's certainly not our goal. The Constitution says equal population and legislative. So I think our goal is to get much closer than that on all these districts.
No, absolutely, 100% agree. Yeah.
Okay, let's move to demographics. Let me reset the table here. That way it's not off the screen here. So let me remove these metrics. Okay. So for demographics, let's close the key elections folder here, and let's go open up the Arizona standard demographics. And you can see in here total census population, a breakdown here by ethnicity. And then at the very end, we can start to see some of the special tabulations for our citizen voting age population. So for demographics, we can come up here and we can turn on population, Latino, non-Hispanic white, Black, Asian American, Native American, other if you want. If you want non-Hispanic, other multi-race, you can turn that on also. But if not, come down here and look at the citizen voting age population data that is down here at the bottom. And again, you can see the description over here as I'm checking them off. So you can see standard non-Hispanic white single race. The top one was standard Hispanic citizen voting age population, 2015, 2019. And we can go all the way down to the bottom. And once we hit OK, now we can start to look at the population breakdown. So that's another way that you can start to look at the demographics. Doug, I don't know if you want to add anything here.
Just to highlight what people probably saw on the screen is that you can choose to see the numbers, or you can also choose to see the percentages.
Yep.
Or both.
Any questions on that?
Doug, in your experience, is it easier to look at the percentages? Is that?
Yes, the percentages are what will really matter, because the number of citizens in each district can vary widely. So it's really which group is the percentage of that citizen voting age, or as the courts refer to them, the eligible voters in that district. So yes, it's handy to know that there's 177,000 citizens of voting age, but then if you want to know, does this comply with the Voting Rights Act, you're really going to focus on, are Latinos 50% or are they 30% or whatever group you're looking at. So the numbers are handy. The percentages are really the key factors.
Again, you can get there from the demographics button, and they have options for some or percent, as Doug was saying.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I have to show you on the redistricting system. I don't know if there's any questions on that or other questions. Commissioner Lerner, I know you mentioned you had a couple of them. I don't know if we've answered them all or not.
You have done a great job answering the questions I had, so thank you.
Good. Any other questions while I got this open from any of the commissioners?
I do have a question that doesn't relate to all of this piece, but it was something that Doug Johnson mentioned, or you mentioned last time, about duplicate submissions. And how will we as commissioners, if we get 20 people who all submit the exact same map, last time we looked at, and if this isn't the right place, I'm sorry, you can tell me to stop. But how will we as commissioners, we need to be able to recognize we're just being swamped with the same thing versus, is this a valid map versus another? So maybe Doug Johnson, can you tell us how, because you've had this probably happen, right? Where you get a lot of the same. How do we as commissioners judge something like that when we see people have all just taken the same map and copied it and sent it?
It's completely at your judgment and discretion as individual commissioners. Our advice would be to rely on the wisdom of the maps, not the volume of the maps. So it's completely up to you to decide how you want to each individually evaluate those. The system won't detect duplicate maps. You know, if one person submits a map and someone else submits a map, they'll be processed as two separate maps. But obviously when you're looking at maps, you'll be able to see that. And the tool has that great compare maps function that highlights differences in the maps. And if it doesn't find anything, then you can quickly see the two maps are the same. But they will come to you as individual maps. But we would encourage the public to simply send in an email or a letter saying we all support the map submitted by Joe X, rather than feeling any preference to have 30 people submit the exact same map and try to flood the system, because we are looking, it would certainly be our encouragement and our advice to focus on the wisdom and ingenuity of the maps, not on the volume of them.
And I have great confidence that, you know, the commissioners, we receive many other forms of data. And when we put all sources of information together and we digest the information, I have great confidence we could discern, you know, quantity versus quality.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the redistricting system or hub?
I don't think so.
Okay. Let me stop sharing this then. You know, the next piece is updates on demographic and competitiveness measures and the polarization report. Let me bring up some stuff on my screen for you. So for the legislative grid map, you can see on the screen, here is the demographic and competitiveness summary breakdown. What you'll notice is what we showed you in the redistricting system is the data that was used to generate this report. So you can see here, category where it says field, this is all the districts. We have 30 districts in our legislative system. So it's breakdown. We have the next column, which is total population. The next column is deviation from ideal. So you will see, as we presented last week with the grid map, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 districts legislatively that have one more person than the other ones, because there's no way of splitting a person. So we had to use whole numbers here. Percent deviation, you can see the zeros, your total population number, which is not your citizen voting age population. Your total population, you can see the breakdown in the different demographics from Hispanic, Latino, non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic black, non-Hispanic Asian Pacific Islander, and non-Hispanic Native American. There's your breakdown. The next section over is citizen voting age, which is what we showed you at the bottom to check for the demographics, which was the special tabulation. You can have the total population of CVAP in each district. And then the same thing, it was broken down by Hispanic Latino, non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic black, non-Hispanic Asian Pacific Islander, non-Hispanic Native American. So you can see the percentages here. On the competitiveness, here's the vote spread, which you saw what Doug was talking about at the comp rep votes versus the comp dem votes for the total amount votes for that district. So there's the percentage of spread. And then if you go over to the next two columns, you see Dem wins and Republican wins. So that was the exact thing that I showed you when we set up each race to look who was over 50%. So in District 1, it happens to be that the Dems won all 9 races that you guys selected, and the Republicans won 0. In the district below it, you can see there was only a 0.5 of 1% spread, and that was that one district that we all saw. And you can see that the Dems won 5 of the 9 elections that you selected, and the Republicans won 4 of the elections that you guys selected. One thing that I do want to note here is at the very last row that says statewide. This is statewide, looking at the state as a whole. So we added everything up. So you can see the population is the total population for the entire state, 7,151,502 at the census. So this is the breakdown for total population ethnicity for the entire state. Same thing with CVAP. This is the total number of citizen voting age for the entire state under that special tabulation. The vote spread is looking at the entire state. So this is not an add up here. This is looking at the entire state. And this 5 and 4 is also not an add up saying that the Dems won 5 of the districts and the Republicans won 4 of the districts. This is saying that at a statewide level, out of the 9 elections that you chose, the Democrats won 5 and the Republicans won 4. So I just want to make sure I pointed that last row out, because sometimes if you look to add this up, you'd be, why is that number not add up? And it'll make more sense when I show you the congressional grid of why I put that caution out there.
And Mark, say again how you get to this chart.
This chart we will post on Hub for the public to be able to see. But the way that you can get the data to build something just like this is exactly what I showed you previously with the competitive measures, looking at the different percentages, and then the population ethnicity that we showed you in the Arizona standard demographics folder. Total population was the first part of the demographics. And then when we move to the citizen voting age special tabulation at the end, that is how we came up with the second piece, that is the citizen voting age population. Down here at the very bottom is sort of a key talking about, the vote spread and what that means. And then Dem/Rep wins, talking about what that is and the different races in case that you need a chart real quick. So 2020 President, Senate, 2018 Governor, Secretary of State, Attorney General, State Treasurer, Superintendent of Public Education, and State Mine Inspector, and 2016 President. There's also some coloring here on the competitiveness, and the coloring key is up here on the very top. So if population deviation from the target population was higher than 5%, you would see a red, but we don't have any deviation, so there's no red here, is we built it at equal population. And then the vote spread, what you can start to see is, if you see in this column, I guess I can't just highlight a column, this competitiveness vote spread column, if you see a dark green color in here, that means that it's a highly competitive district. So it's that measure that you guys chose that was 4% spread or less. So in here, you can see that we got one at 0.5 of 1%, and we have another one at 0.9 of 1%. So those are your two highly competitive. And then you can see in the light green, it is what you guys would consider competitive, which was the difference between the two metrics that you guys chose. So the highly competitive ended at 4, and then the next measure that you guys approved was a 7% spread. So if it fell within the 4 and the 7% spread, we marked it as a light green. So you can see here, there's one at 4.5, there's one at 5.7, 6.8, and 6.2. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 competitive districts according to your metrics. Now, if we look at the next column, because the dark green and light green colors do not correspond always from the vote spread to the Dem wins and the Republican wins, as you can see here in this row. So if you see a dark green over here, you can see in District 2, we had 5 Dem wins and 4 Republican wins. It's dark green if we have a swing in 2 or more elections. It is light green if you only have a swing in a direction with 1 election. So you can see over here, we have a 1 and an 8. So that's a light green as a swing. So there you have 1, 2, 3 light green on the number of wins in the swings.
Mark, I just want to remind everybody, this is the grid map, which is going to change. So this is just a good way for you to look at it and see where we are, but not to get too worried at this point, because this is a great explanation, but people will be playing around with these numbers. So thank you.
Yes, you're very right. This is a grid. We didn't take any of this into account, but we figured you guys would want the data on what came out with the grid. This is the bigger one. Is there any questions here, or can I bring up the congressional?
Please move ahead.
Okay. Same thing, same coloring key up here that we just talked about. Same descriptions down here, same races, nothing different. Just this is the congressional district or map that only has 9 districts. So same thing. Here's your district numbers 1 through 9, total population. You can see that we had 3 districts that were over by 1. Again, we have to use whole numbers. Breakdown of total population, the breakdown of ethnicities. For the CVAP, the same thing. Here's your total CVAP in the district, the breakdown of ethnicities, and then you can see competitiveness. So the reason I brought up the statewide so heavily on the first one is that you can see here statewide population, again, for the entire state, the total breakdown of ethnicities for the entire state. Sorry, I got a little tongue-tied there. Same with CVAP. But when you come over to competitiveness, if you looked at this one first, right, we have a 0.9 of 1% vote spread. But if you added up the Democrat wins, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's a 5 there. And if you add up the Republican wins, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 there. It looks like these 2 columns just add up, but they don't. It just turns out that that was the exact same at a statewide level. So I just want to caution the public that this is not an addition and a total. This is if you looked at it for the entire statewide. So here you had, one highly competitive district at 2.9% to not highly competitive in the competitiveness category. And then you also had the breakdowns here. So you had 1, 2, 3 districts that swung 1 or more times. I can go through this one in more detail, but I figured I gave you guys the detail on the first one that I just give you a quick summary here.
And that was very helpful, Mark. And even though, the data isn't meaningful, given that the map is arbitrary, it does, kind of season us to, look at the data, learn how to interpret it and be ready to apply it, when we have more meaningful districts.
And Mark, how quickly will we get this kind of data as we're adjusting maps? Will we be getting this with each adjustment, the same kind of table?
Yes, but I wouldn't say every adjustment. You could have like 10 different adjustments that you want to make. And I would think we would go through that list of the 10 adjustments and then give you a table. Otherwise, it wouldn't give us time to edge match to do a bunch of other stuff. So I think it'd be, the major revision, so that we went through your 10 changes that was your revision, and here you go.
Absolutely.
And-
That sounds fun.
Yeah, and thanks to the way Mark was showing earlier, as you're asking about changes, if we're making the changes live in the system, we can't see the summary of Dem wins and Republican wins, but we can see live the vote spread number change. And we can also see the individual elections. So if we know we're trying to, if the commission's actively working to move a seat from 8-1 to 5-4, we can see those individual races live as we do the changes. So we just won't get the 8-1 summary, but you'll be able to see live that, oh, okay, these three have flipped.
Yeah, Doug's right. Technically, that data table will update as we showed in the previous demo with all those numbers.
Yeah, you won't have to wait for us to run this spreadsheet in order to see if you made a district more competitive. It'll be right there in the system.
Thank you.
That is all I have for the demographics competitiveness piece. Doug, you want to talk about the racial polarization report?
Just a quick update. We're wrestling with some difficult data issues of the geocoded voter file. It doesn't line up quite with the census data precinct file, which doesn't line up quite with the precincts from the county's file. And so we need to have all of that data correct. And so we know we're late. We're pushing very hard to get this done as fast as we can. But it's more important that we get it right than we get it to you on time. So as soon as we resolve those issues, the scripts and all that are all set to run, and the table, we actually, since we have a little time on the analysis side, they've written a script that generates all the tables they need as well. So it'll be pretty fast, but we do need to nail down those data issues. And it's all a result of the state doesn't build this database year over year like some states do. We have to build this from scratch. So it's coming along. We're definitely making progress, but we're not quite there yet.
Well, thank you very much. Any last questions for our mapping team? Okay, well, thank you. We are actually going to move to agenda item number 9, which piggybacks on this, briefing, a discussion and possible action concerning proposed modifications from the grid map pursuant to the Arizona constitutional criteria and applicable law and scheduling of map drawing meetings, meaning we've arrived, the main event. We are, really, it's imminent where we're going to get together and draw the maps. As the staff and I were looking at our schedules, it became really apparent that we're very short on group time that we have towards the end. It looks like 3 days, possibly up to 5 days of deliberation. In my research, I've learned, based on studying many other commissions, that even 5 days, when it's the commission's first time drawing a map, is probably not going to be enough time. There's just a lot of unknowns with work styles, turnaround time with the mapping team, etc. So if we don't either find additional time or maybe change our strategy, our deadline's at risk. I am not a proponent of extending the deadline. I think it's an awful option. The challenges we're facing right now are routine challenges that will always be there, but there's likely to be additional challenges down the road that we don't have control over. So for now, I think it's important that we stick to this very firm deadline of approving draft maps by October 27th. And by the way, I'm so sorry. I had wanted to ask Val to note for the minutes that Vice Chair Watchman joined at 8:12, almost an hour ago. So welcome, Vice Chair Watchman.
Noted.
Thank you. What can we do about this? I would like the commissioners to entertain the idea of starting a little early. What does that mean? Could be as early as even next week, but we make some of those early preliminary decisions, or at least have those early preliminary conversations about things that are very, I'd say, consensus oriented. Now, before anybody says, whoa, we don't have data, what are we prejudging things, etc., I just want to remind everybody where we're at. We finished a listening tour, 15 days, 39 different locations. We've studied over 182 communities of interest. I have spent countless time, I'm still digesting the data from, the previous tour. In addition, I'd like to point out that we've been doing this 8 months, so we're accumulating broad experience with the state. We've received thousands of public comments. We've already viewed countless maps. And with that, I'd like to remind us that we already have a foundation. Collectively, we have over 250 years of Arizona experience. Okay, I'm the newcomer with 41 years here. So also consider that within 1 week, 60% of our new tour will be complete, and we will have all of that data and the feedback per the turnaround time from mapping. So also, just for a point of reference, the previous commission absolutely did this. I don't know of any commission actually that didn't do it. And from a psychological perspective, and this is what sold me as I began to think about it, but I'm one, and we're opening it up to conversation. But I thought about it from a people perspective, a psychological perspective. I don't know about you, but there's angst about this. I've never drawn boundaries. I'm not an expert in this. And to be able to have a little early time to get our feet wet, to learn the language, to learn each other, may be a good thing. And the final point is, if we start a little early, we can do a full competitive analysis at the end. Remember, we've talked so often about the criteria, and the competitiveness can't cause, whatever level of detriment to the other criteria we interpret. There can be incredible work done on maximizing competitiveness if we get our communities of interest and all other criteria in order. I think other commissions have bemoaned the fact that they didn't have more time at the end. So with that, I'm going to suggest we have a dialogue about the concept of when to start, and also for us, because this is also very important, to work backwards in the calendar and really dig deep and find our common times. So I spoke for a while. I'd like to open it up to questions, comments, and/or we could first look at dates if you think that's the better way, so that we understand, what we're looking at.
I think looking at dates first is actually not a bad idea. We'll see how many dates we can meet, and then return to the discussion of what do we do next Tuesday.
Okay. So the drop dead deadline for approved maps, in order for us not to extend our deadline, is October 27th, a Wednesday. I suggest we not move into that day with much left on our plate. I don't think having a deadline like that is conducive to really good quality, thinking. Obviously, it could be there as a buffer and an emergency day, but that's the drop dead deadline. So let's look at the 25th and 26th. I believe those dates are possible. Does anybody have a conflict on those dates?
October, we're talking, right? We're going to go
October 25th, 26th, and 27th.
I'm good
All day.
I'm good on all three.
I'm sorry, I have a conflict on all three.
You have a conflict on all three?
Yeah, I'm supposed to be on a trip.
Okay. And I believe, so let's look at the 23rd and 24th, the weekend.
I'm fine.
I'm available the week of the 18th.
Okay, we're going to work backwards, Commissioner York. Let's first focus on the 23rd and 24th. Because there's many other conflicts, Commissioner York, trust me.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, that's also a conflict. That's the start of it.
So the 23rd and 24th is out. Okay, Commissioner Watchman, you are gone from?
I am gone the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th.
Okay, so the 22nd is out. So far we have 0 deliberation dates available during deliberation week. Moving to the 21st, who's available?
I'm okay that whole week.
I am as well.
21st, I'm good.
Okay, so we have the 21st. What about the 20th?
20 is good for me.
I'm available.
I'm good.
Okay, 20th. 19th.
I'm good.
Yes.
Yes, for me.
Okay, so after a business meeting, we could do all day. You know what, staff and mapping, I'm not including conflicts potentially with you. Mark, I know you have a few things. If there's anything that we're circling as a yes and you're not available, please let us know. Or if you don't have staff available.
Okay, we're
Okay, the 18th.
I'm good.
Yes.
I'm good.
Yes?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay, so we have 4 days so far. Great. I believe the 16th and 17th, the weekend, are out, correct? Those days?
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner Watchman, I believe you're out of town maybe the entire week of the 11th?
I am, except for Friday, the 15th.
Oh, you're in town on the 15th.
Yes.
How does the 15th look for everybody?
I'm good.
I
Okay.
can make that work.
Yay. Okay, we're making real progress. We have 5 days. I think we need more, but that's a real solid amount, at least a chunk of time. Vice Chair Watchman, you said you're out till the 14th?
Yes, I am. From
Okay.
Saturday, 9th through Thursday, 14th, yes.
Okay, so that brings us to the week of October 4th, 2 weeks from now. And we have 5 days, provided that nothing happens, nobody gets sick, no other challenges. I still think that based on the feedback I've heard, that, maybe it's enough and maybe not. And I think there may be value to starting a little earlier. Do people want to look at the week of the 4th? When I'm thinking about just general guidelines even to share with mapping, if we come together for the first day, remember we're working from a grid map. So it's going to take a while to shift it just in common sense ways to get even a starting point as a template. Maybe there are things we could ask mapping to do, and I'm just brainstorming, like focus on majority minority communities that we know there's not much wiggle room, focus on helping us map where communities of interest are on the grid map so we can get a better sense of where the lines might need to shift. But thoughts?
I'm available on the 5th all day.
I'm available that week, that entire week, if we want to schedule as whatever meetings we can.
I apologize, I'm out of town. I was leaving on the 3rd. I could postpone to the 6th, but from the 6th to the 10th, I'm totally out of pocket. I'm on the East Coast for a family wedding.
So could we do the October 4th and 5th? Would that work?
I could do for the 4th and 5th.
I can do the 4th and 5th.
Same here.
I can do the 4th for mapping, but the 5th I'll be out of town.
Okay. Is it, okay.
I might be able to find somebody that could replace me though.
Yeah, so if necessary, but this is, so we have,
And on Monday on the 4th, I need to be done by 4 p.m.
okay.
Yeah, just to set expectations, as we're looking at this is we can get someone there. It may very well not be Mark or I, but
Okay.
Well, the 4th would be our first day. We should have that be the day of guidance.
Well, and some initial work.
Right, yeah, I agree with that.
If we're going to convene, we might as well take advantage of, the 8 hours we have.
Right.
I will say by that week, we will not have the completed report or the data for the grid map public hearings. At that time, we'll still be having another one. So just.
But by that day, we will have completed, like I said, over 80%, because I think with our satellites, it's front heavy. We'll have over 80% of the new data available. And then, we will have 5 substantive days towards the latter part when all data's in. So I think that's a really, I'm relieved. I was a little concerned, but thank you everybody for really trying to be as flexible as possible. And do I get the sense then that there's consensus that it's okay to start just slightly early, those early days with a little preliminary work?
That's
I
good
think
with
it's a good
me.
idea. Yeah.
Can you recap the days we just agreed on?
Yes. Beginning on Monday, October 4th, with an end time at 4 p.m. Should we presume an 8 a.m. start? And just as a reminder, we initially, thought about breaking up the day between, the morning, maybe congressional, the afternoon, legislative, and then, vice versa, so that we give both maps, considerable attention. Starting early, I don't know, as we're getting our feet wet, if that makes sense. We'll follow the direction and guidance of our mapping team.
And I apologize. I did not have something. Did not have October 4th up. I'm out of town. I could probably meet for some of the morning, but then when I'm getting on a plane, I won't be able to. So I'm not available. I'm available first thing in the morning for a few hours, but then probably not most of the afternoon because of my flight.
So you're gone on the 5th too then?
No, I'm back.
Oh.
I'm returning on that day. I'm just looking to see. I'd be available from 8 to 12 that day.
You know what? For a first day, I think that's a good chunk. Mark, Doug, do you think we can accomplish something meaningful in that 4-hour chunk?
you can certainly have a robust discussion. I don't know
Okay.
where you'll get in terms of mapping or anything like that.
Okay, but it'll be a starting point, and then we'll have it, that way when we dive into it on the 5th, it'll be, we're ready to go. Mapping will be ready to go. We'll take advantage of the time. So here's the time. Monday the 4th from 8 to 12. Tuesday the 5th how do we want to work, the hours? Do we want 4 hours in the morning with a break and then 4 hours in the afternoon? Do you guys want long days? I can go 10 hours. Well, we'll save the 12-hour days till the end.
I think we should try to maximize our time, especially since we've all had Tuesdays set aside.
Okay, so start at 8 a.m. and just plow through until it's no longer productive?
It's good with me.
Plan 8 hours?
Yeah.
And we'll start with the business meeting and then flow into mapping. Okay, so Tuesday the 5th, 8 a.m. to ongoing. Then we have October 15th. If possible, I'd like to start at 9 a.m. that day because I actually have a speaking engagement for the IRC. I can cancel that if necessary, though. Let's stay tuned. Can we stay? If I can reschedule it, maybe we should. The 15th, whether it's an 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. start time, plan for all day. And then the 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st, we should plan 8 a.m. starts and go through the entire day.
I just, so you know, on the 15th, I have to leave, and I'm flying to a wedding in Northern California. So at some point, maybe 4 o'clock, I'll have to leave.
Okay. Great.
And on the 4th, I may be calling in versus being online, but I'll be able to be there. But it may be by phone.
Okay. Okay, excellent. Any further discussion on this topic? Thank you for everybody's flexibility. I know it's not ideal, but it never is. And it's hard coordinating this number of people's schedules. And I want to just give a special shout out to the mapping team. I know we're pushing you on a time schedule that you didn't plan for. And we're deeply appreciative for you working with us. And thank you. There's no other conversation I'm going to suggest before we move to the next agenda item, which is back to number 6, the executive director's report and discussion thereof. I think this is a logical breaking point to just take maybe a quick, 10-minute break, 8-minute break.
And then I would ask that Brian, can you send out a kind of summary of those dates and times?
Yes, I will do that.
For something like that. All right, perfect.
Okay, see you all soon.
Thanks, Erica.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'll wait till I see everybody's screens turn on.
Chair Newberg,
Yes.
would it be possible for us to consider having the meeting on October 4th in the afternoon instead of the morning? I could be more present, I guess is the thing. If I could be there from 12, if it could be 12 to 4 versus 8 to 12. Because I think
Yeah,
people
let's just wait until we're all online together and officially start the meeting again, and we'll review. I have some things to review as well with the group. Okay, I think do we have everybody on?
It looks like we do.
Okay, great. Welcome back, everybody. Commissioner Lerner just mentioned or requested to possibly look at noon to 4 on the 4th instead of 8 to 12. How does that look for the group? You're on mute, Commissioner Meal.
I'm good.
Would we want to, that's fine with me, but would we want to actually go till like 6? If we're going to start as late as noon?
I can go once I'm online, I can go the whole day. I just, otherwise I had to cut short at 12. And I could be more present this way where I wouldn't have to be calling in. So to 6 is fine with me.
Okay, noon to 6.
I'm okay with that.
Great. And per that previous conversation, something actually threw me for a loop. I didn't realize that we had a conflict on the 25th, 26th, and 27th. That is the end of that official 23-day period that the public has the opportunity to comment. So it was brought to my attention during the break that if we have our final deliberation on the 21st, that is technically shortchanging the public a little less than a week, a few extra days of public comment time. You know, so what do we think about that? I mean, you know, on one level, do we think that, I mean, all the excuse me?
Can we extend the public comment to 28, 29?
Well, but the point is that our last deliberation was the 21st, and so we were going to be voting on a map on that day. Now, you know, but I had thought initially we were going to be able to vote at the end of that public comment period. Commissioner York, are you out of town on the 28th and 29th as well?
No.
So we have really two options. You know, one option, if we want to, you know, fulfill the full public comment period and not vote for a final map until the end of that, we could potentially add maybe the 28th or 29th. It does violate our deadline by a day or two, but I don't think it substantively affects things. You know, obviously, much of the deliberation would happen early anyway, but that's one option. The other option is to deliberate and vote on maps on the 21st and, you know, hope that the public understands, but let's have a little dialogue about the choice.
Could you clarify on the 23-day public period? When does that start from? Is that the comment on the grid maps or
Yes, and I'd like to defer to council or Doug on this. You know, with the schedule, you know, on the schedule it has the 27th as the deadline, and so I presume that entails the full 23-day review. We had voted to, you know, on the schedule, we voted for 23 days. We could vote if we move it early. We would need a motion to, you know, move up the vote to the 21st. But maybe legal counsel can chime in here on any legal, you know, implications of this decision.
But we've already published the grid maps and we're still in September. So how do we not have 23 days? I thought it was a 3-week comment period, basically. So how do we not have 3 weeks to comment on the grid maps well in advance of that?
I
I'm not
see it.
sure we have, I'm not sure we have a real issue here.
Yeah, I see that on the map, on the schedule, it looks like our 23-day review for the grid map ends October 8th. But then our draft map is, we have an October 27th with coming up with draft maps.
Yeah. I don't
That's
think
an excellent, yeah, that's an excellent point. So
Yeah.
legal counsel, we didn't, it doesn't look like we advertised that we were considering additional public comment once October 15th hits.
Yeah. So I think we're okay with what we're doing and we're okay to finish on the 21st. If we can reach consensus and do it. Yeah. And I am available that week of the 27th and 8th. If we probably should tentatively hold some more dates in case we don't finish by the 21st. But let's really try hard to do that.
I agree.
Yeah, so Madam Chair, I guess my thought is that, you know, looking at the calendar, I think the idea would be, or perhaps the consideration would be, you know, does the public expect to have until the 27th to provide public input, you know, given that original schedule, and would shortening that time period, you know, be something different than what they expected? That's sort of the consideration. But if I think the suggestion that was just made of having reserve dates on the 28th and 29th when all 5 commissioners are available is probably a good idea, just so that the commissioners have that blocked off if those dates are necessary. You may not need them, but if you do, you know, you can have them. Again, assuming that all 5 commissioners are available.
But can we look at what is actually written on schedule option 2? Because it says, you know, 23-day review, which is from 9/15 to October 8th. The 23-day review is over October 8th. Then there's additional 4 days for comment and data compilation or whatever, October 11th through the 15th. So where does the public get the notion that they are providing feedback all the way to the 27th? Because on our map, on our schedule that we've made public and we approved, that whole final week is just decision making.
I do think it would be wise to amend the schedule and show that our goal is to complete the draft maps by the 21st, so that anyone going to the website or looking at our materials can see that that's what we're trying to do.
Yep.
And maybe even show an alternative up to the 29th if we haven't completed by the 21st, just to make it clear.
Yeah. And that would be appropriate to ensure public involvement in the process, and that still gives you over a month from today for public comment as well as your drawing of the maps.
Yeah, I would agree that if you're going to make the change, that you should vote to make that change to the schedule for that reason. And again, to your point, Madam Chair, I mean, ultimately, this is a policy decision. It sort of depends on whether the commissioner is expected to receive public comment up until that last map drawing day that we had in the original schedule or not. You know, is that something the commissioners expected to do or not? So to answer your question.
Okay. That's actually a really important point, Roy, and let's ask the commissioners. I did not expect to have additional data after October 15th. I presume that when we came together during that concentrated mapping time, that we were taking a pause from data collection and we were exclusively focused on mapping. But if, you know, I don't know others' expectations of that.
And I think even though we're starting now on the 4th and 5th, we should fully expect to get data up through the 15th still, because we will still be on the very early stages of us being together trying to draw maps. So I don't think we need to amend the October 15th date. But I think amending the 27th date to the 21st and making that publicly known would be a good thing.
So Commissioner Meal, just to clarify, looking at this, would we basically just say that we're going to just do our draft? We have our draft maps development dates, 10/15 to 10/22 now on this schedule option 2, right? So we're just modifying it slightly to 21. The next line was draft maps public decision meeting, 10/22 to 10/27, which is really not what we're doing at this point. We're kind of combining those, right? We're condensing all of that into one. So that's where we probably want to condense that and clarify all of that. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
That makes sense to me.
And then I would show a alternative. I would make a next line that says alternative dates if needed through October 29th.
If I may, Madam Chair, just a flag about adding dates at the end. Well, 23 days was the commission adopted. The 30 days afterwards is in the Constitution.
Right.
So if you push back adopting the draft map, you're pushing back everything. So that would probably push back your decision days at the end, which I would caution you against doing.
I really hope we can finish by the 21st, and then that would put us in good position for that 30 days.
Can we call
Exactly.
additional meetings after the 21st if we need it?
I guess I would just suggest that all commissioners keep the 28th and 9th clear on their calendar, even if we don't publish those as additional days, so that we don't run into this again where we can't get together.
And I agree. I think we should set those aside. That would only, it would only put us off if we had to by a day or two. So it wouldn't be dramatic change. And I think that goes with what Chair Newberg was talking about, was we don't always know what's going to come up. So add the October 28th and 29th on hold.
And along those lines, take a look at the calendar in the the December deliberation week as well, and let's try to avoid scheduling travel during those windows. So I want to make sure that there's no disagreement about us having this motion and moving up the decision making to the 21st. It gives the public more than a month. A month of additional comment on the grid maps. The public hearings would have been well done by then. But it's I want to make sure that all of us are comfortable with this. Okay. If there's no further dialogue, I'll entertain a motion to move up the decision date to October 21st with the possibility of extending it to the 28th or 29th if necessary.
This is Commissioner Meal. I move that motion.
Vice Chair Watchman seconds.
Any further discussion? Okay, Vice Chair Watchman.
Aye.
Commissioner Meal.
Aye.
Commissioner Lerner.
Aye.
Commissioner York.
Aye.
Commissioner Newberg is an aye. And with that, we will convene the mapping process on the 4th with the goal of ending on the 21st.
And to clarify, the 4th, we would begin at noon, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Newberg, Chairwoman Newberg, you mentioned looking at the blocking out dates for those final mapping. You want to reaffirm what those dates are?
So we have the major time from the 14th. Commission revised and tentatively adopted plans from the 14th to the 17th, and then the final adopted plans at the 22nd. So
this is all December?
yes. So from the 14th through the 22nd is prime time.
Okay.
And possibly even just understanding that, we may need to extend it a day or two now. That may, extend a couple days as well. Hopefully not. We know the holidays right around the corner. Okay, if there's no other discussion, we can move to agenda item number 6, Executive Director's Report and discussion thereof.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First up, I'm going to talk about migration. It is currently underway, and it should be complete in the next 3 to 6 weeks. So we'll be fully integrated with legal counsel's e-discovery system. Next up, Michelle is on the way to Window Rock, and Alex is on the way to Yuma. So Marie is going to give an update on our outreach efforts. Marie?
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the commission. Just a quick follow-up. Michelle continues to get calls from the media and setting up interviews with reporters about the work that the commission is doing. Alex has been continuously posting to our various social media platforms, and he says he's gaining a lot of traction, especially on the maps that he's put up, showing where the meetings are, where the meetings have been. People like that kind of visual, I think. So that's been working really well. And then I continue to follow up with groups who are on our list of contacts just to make sure that they've been receiving our information. If they have any questions, we created a flyer for the library to start distributing to their membership in the various libraries throughout the state. And then kind of a thank you to some of the cities that we will be having meetings in. They have been trying to help us find volunteers, especially when we have one staff member who will be staffing a meeting. So it looks like several of the cities will be joining us to help with the attendees who are coming to the meetings. And that is about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Next up, Lori is going to talk about our public meetings we have going on.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman and Commissioners. I am super excited about the first grid map meeting tonight in Mesa, and as Marie described, we have one in Yuma and Window Rock today. If you want to take a look at any of our upcoming grid map public hearings, they're on our website under at the irc.az.gov under the public hearing section. What we are planning now, especially after the direction that we received from the commissioners this morning, is a series of public hearings for the draft maps once those are adopted. Our anticipated dates would be from starting November 2nd to November 23rd. And we are soliciting input from the various organizations, people, the commissioners, based on our previous listening tour meetings. We're looking for different locations that we can make sure to attend. One of the decisions that we made for the grid map meetings was to host them in larger venues, because we were super excited and super surprised by how many people wanted to attend the listening tour meetings back in August. And so we wanted to make sure we had enough room, especially with the seriousness of COVID, so that people could socially distance. But on these upcoming meetings, because we can have more frequent meetings, we can start to look at some of the venues that had been limiting attendance and go to several smaller meetings. So I'd ask anybody listening with the public to let us know where you'd like us to see the meetings next. And we have some options available at the grid map hearings for people to show us where they want to have us go next, and anybody can email us or contact us directly. Those are all of the updates I have, unless the commission wants to direct me to do anything with those meetings.
So Lori, can you clarify a little bit what you mean when you say we'll have more meetings? You know, what's the vision that you're talking about there on how that will work? A morning meeting and an afternoon meeting, same day, similar location?
Well, and I guess I'll leave it to the commission to direct me on that as well. The first thing we were looking at is when we will, the commission will adopt the draft map. So now that we have a definitive kind of timeline on when that can happen, we were thinking more frequent meetings, potentially morning and afternoon. And it also depends on our mapping team. And so we're working with them to see how many meetings that they can do, and then staffing considerations and travel considerations and location considerations.
I'm actually going to suggest that we put this on the agenda for next week for us to have a thoughtful conversation about how to maximize our time during that 30-day review period. How to maximize collecting the feedback from the community. Mapping, could probably do, 2 to 3 public hearings a week, but we may want to supplement that with additional touch points throughout the state. So I think, the staff are coming up with some creative ideas about open houses where, maybe the 5 commissioners aren't just stationary, sitting there absorbing information, but we move around and staff or other, representatives can be in a room with a whole bunch of citizens and collect data. And, we'd obviously work out a system, to how that data is presented to us. But we'd like to be creative with, how do we get out there as much as we can to the public, get them super exposed to the draft maps and fine tune. So, put your thinking caps on, and maybe we can reconvene next week and have a deliberate, conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Does that sound good, Lori? Is there any other, feedback that you're looking for right now?
No, I think that's perfect. I will absolutely gather the information, have options to present to the commission next week. And then with your direction, you can let us know what you would like to do.
And then just as commissioners, we should note that November 2nd to November 23rd dates to do what we can to be around and set those aside where we can, correct?
That would be wonderful.
You know what? I would set aside between now and December 22nd. And I'm only partially joking.
Well, Aaron, is in my industry, the fall is the convention season for our business, but November, December are pretty light. It's October, September. I'm in Chicago today. So.
Okay. Good. Thanks for joining. Okay, anything else? Brian, Lori?
That is all we have for you all today.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to agenda item number 7, discussion and possible action on presentations from economic drivers for the state. I have nothing for the group. I don't know if there's anything the group, feels the need to follow up on.
Commissioner Meal, I think we've had some great presentations that have been really helpful, but we're about to hit the mapping hard, and unless there's something really compelling, I would suggest that we've got the information we need.
I would agree.
Okay, I agree as well. With that, we'll move to agenda item number 8, legal update from council. There are 2 items. We'll have first a presentation on Latino voting rights and an overview of redistricting case law specific to Latino communities. And B, presentation on overview of principles involved in identifying and drawing majority minority districts under federal law. Council will give as much of this presentation as possible in public session. I am going to recommend that we move into executive session, which will not be open to the public, for the purpose of obtaining legal advice to further implement and or advance these legal issues pursuant to ARS 38-431.03A3, being able to move into executive session for the commissioners to be able to ask questions about majority minority districts. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Roy Herrera.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to be clear, we will be doing the executive session piece at the end of this, right? So I will do a public presentation, and then we'll need
Correct.
to do
Thank you.
Let me share my screen here, and sometimes this is an endeavor, so let me try. And it's not letting me. Okay. Figured it out. I hope. You guys don't see it, do you? Let's see.
Not yet.
Okay.
I have it pulled up, Roy, if you'd like me to present.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just so that
Okay.
we're not wasting time here. It says it's sharing on my computer, but it clearly is not. So yeah, if you could make sure to be using the presentation marked public, we can go from there. So I'll go ahead and get started. So I think just to kind of outline the day a little bit, we're going to talk about, the purpose of today's conversation, I think, is to talk about Latino voting rights and how those rights have been applied under the Voting Rights Act. And then from there, springboard into a discussion about majority-minority districts, how the importance of majority-minority districts and how they're treated under the Voting Rights Act. And then at the end of the conversation, an executive session, we'll discuss principles related to majority-minority districts as were used by IRC 2.0, and then also with the current grid map. So I think that's kind of the lay of the land. I'm going to start with, and thank you for putting that up, if you want to go to the next slide. With a look at history of Latino voting rights in Arizona, I'm starting obviously very early, pre-territorial days, and then going to work through more recent history. And then I'll talk about a couple of seminal cases. They're not Arizona cases, but examples of Latino community asserting their rights under the Voting Rights Act and how that's been treated under redistricting. And then, of course, talk a little bit more in more of a refresher manner of the rules under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. A couple of things that I'm not going to be talking about today, just so you're aware, is we're not going to be discussing, and we've talked about this in prior legal presentations, the difference between vote dilution and vote denial cases under Section 2. In a redistricting context, vote dilution cases are the kind of cases that you primarily see, and that's what we're going to be focusing our time on here. But there is, of course, a long history of cases related to vote denial, and in particular, vote denial as it's affected the Latino community. So a lot of the same kinds of literacy tests and poll taxes and even some versions of voter ID have been challenged under the Voting Rights Act in a vote denial setting. But I'm not going to talk about that in detail because, again, that's not particularly relevant, I think, for redistricting purposes. The other thing I'm not going to talk about today from a legal perspective is just something that I think we've already talked about before, is the concept of one person, one vote under the 14th Amendment in the Arizona Constitution, because again, I think we've given that kind of advice already in presentation on that to the commission. Of course, if you have questions about it, we can answer them now or in executive session, but we're not going to be focused on that. So let's jump back into the presentation. The beginning of this, of course, is the overview of kind of the stark history of discrimination against Latinos, and this is not news to folks in Arizona and nationally. And so I'm going to talk, as you can see in this first screen, about sort of the early period in Arizona. This is, of course, when a portion of Arizona was still part of Mexico. This early period, there were many examples, and again, this is mostly based on historical research of Latinos holding prominent roles in the community. This is one of sort of it wasn't a period where we had sort of the exact kind of democracy, that we have here in Arizona, but it is important to note that. Then at the end of the Mexican-American War, we had the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and at that point, the United States conferred citizenship on about 100,000 Hispanics that were living in Arizona at the time. So that's sort of the first instance of that. Of course, we have this history of the West of a lot of Western migration from the East. I think that Western migration, again, according to historians, led to a reduced role of Latinos in sort of civic life. The result of that from an economic perspective were most Latinos working as laborers at the time with pay disparity. Also, it's important to note that interracial Latinos, those that were Latinos that descended from both Native Americans or African Americans as well as Hispanic backgrounds, fared worse in those early years, early territorial years and pre-territorial years of Arizona. I actually mixed something that I wanted to mention. We are planning on having a academic who is focused on Latino political history come in present to the commission. That's something we're still sorting out from a calendar perspective. So this is my very rudimentary kind of attempt at explaining this academic background that there are countless of experts who teach courses on this, and hopefully at least one of them can come in and present a more holistic view and perhaps a more sophisticated view than I will. But moving on to the next slide, early Arizona, in 1909, the Arizona Territorial Legislature required an English language literacy test as a prerequisite to voter registration. So of course, that was back when we were still a territory, not a state. We still had a territorial legislature with voting. And even back then, there was an English language literacy test related to voter registration. And again, past historians have determined that test was specifically designed to prevent the territory's Hispanic citizens, Latino citizens, from voting because of their lower English literacy rates than white citizens. So again, this is history back in the territorial era. And then we have the Arizona Constitution and Arizona becoming a state. At that convention, the Arizona Constitutional Convention, Latinos were largely excluded from the drafting of that. There was actually only one Latino delegate to the drafting of the Arizona Constitution back in the early 1900s. Next slide, please. Okay. I have a delay on my screen, so I'll look up here. So when Arizona became a state in 1912, the legislature reimposed the English literacy test that existed in the territorial days. And again, that was determined by historians to be used to limit Latino voting. Again, the historical record reflects that Latino voters were frequently required to pass more difficult versions of the literacy test without assistance compared to white voters, and that of course led to disenfranchisement. You'll notice that there's somewhat of a theme here when we talked about in prior weeks of Native American voting rights history in Arizona, and of course, nationally with African American communities, this kind of literacy test was fairly common in this sort of early era. And then, of course, as I mentioned during the Native American voting rights presentation, the literacy test that we're talking about was actually not repealed until 1972. So that's 2 years after the Voting Rights Act amendment that banned literacy tests nationwide. So we had that VRA federal legislation, but then locally that literacy test was actually banned. Now, bringing it further along in history, Latinos in the 1960s were the target of voter intimidation and challenges at the polls. There's sort of a long history of that, or long historical record of that, I should say, from the 1960s. And then leading up to the 1970 election, the Arizona legislature required all citizens to re-register, resulting in an undoing of certain voter registration outreach efforts in Latino communities. And that was, again, related to the 1970 election. Now, fast forward, I think this is a fairly good transition to talk about the Voting Rights Act. Obviously, as we talked about before in prior presentations, the Voting Rights Act was designed primarily to empower Latino voting rights, or I should say minority group voting rights, and prevent discrimination through voting practices and procedures against minority groups. As I have here in this third bullet point, Latinos gained protection under the VRA when Congress amended the statute in 1975 to include protection for language minority groups. And that term included, of course, persons of Spanish heritage, which of course would cover the Latino community here. So it was in 1975 where the VRA clearly covered the Latino community. Now, going a bit further along here and sort of talking about this from a more legal perspective, again, this is not news. Latinos have held statewide elected office in the modern era in Arizona. We've had one governor of Hispanic descent and other statewide office holders. But nevertheless, statistics have shown that Latinos have held fewer elected and judicial offices compared to whites in the state of Arizona. Again, I don't think that's surprising news to anyone, that unfortunate news. Until the VRA's coverage formula for preclearance was repealed by the U.S. Supreme Court, that's the Shelby County decision, Arizona was required to have any law that impacted elections, which included redistricting, of course, pre-cleared by the Department of Justice. And we talked about, what the coverage formula was under Section 4 in our prior presentation. But under that prior coverage formula, Arizona was a covered jurisdiction and therefore had to, submit redistricting maps under the pre-clearance procedure. And as we say here in the third bullet point, Arizona's prior redistricting plans received pre-clearance under Section 5, and the most recent one included 2 majority-minority congressional districts. And again, I think that's something that all of you are well aware of. Next slide. And then again, we have one slide here on some registration trends and sort of numbers that we derived from both Timmins and some academic data. But again, if we are able to secure an academic to come in to present to the commission, which hopefully we can, I think they'll probably be able to present some more detailed numbers on this than we will. But as you can see from here, Latinos are the largest minority group in Arizona. They form 31% of the total population. However, they make a substantially smaller share of the CVAP vote. That's the citizen voting age population. That's 23% of Arizona. We'll talk about the importance of CVAP when talking about the VRA and majority minority districts in a moment. And it's also important to note that Latinos are less likely to vote as cohesively as other minority groups. There's a lot of academic research on that. The most obvious example of that are kind of the difference between Latinos in the state of Florida, for example, and Latinos in the Southwest. But that is something that is unique to the Latino community that may not be present with some other minority groups, particularly the African American community. So providing a bit of an overview of some notable VRA cases that were asserted and relate to Latino voting. The first one is the LULAC case from 2006. Again, this is a vote dilution case, which is the type of case that you normally see in redistricting, a Section 2 vote dilution case. This was a scenario where the state of Texas, and of course, Texas draws their maps there through a legislative process. They drew congressional districts to increase Republican seats and protect a particular Republican incumbent that had been endangered due to an increasingly numerous Latino population. So the reaction to that threat was the particular proposed district, and the court found that in the district at issue, the increase in Latino voter registration and overall population, along with the rise of Latino voting power, and of course the near certain victory of a Latino candidate, were the very reasons that the state redrew the district lines in that particular district. If you go to the next slide, please. The court in that case noted that the statewide redistricting plan failed to accord Latinos proportional representation, and noted that changes to the challenge district undermine the progress of a racial group. And again, that is a situation where the particular increase in Latino population and voting power in that district, the reaction to that was a particular line drawing. Here they're saying that change, that particular line drawing, undermined the progress of the racial group that has been subject to significant voting-related discrimination and is increasingly politically active and cohesive. Again, that latter piece is particularly important under the Jingles test, which I will talk about in a moment. Another sort of quote from the case that I think is instructive, against this background, the Latinos' diminishing electoral support for the incumbent indicated their belief that he was unresponsive to their needs. In other words, they were looking for a different candidate, and the state took away their opportunity because they were about to exercise it. Again, the eventual, and if you want to go to the next slide, the eventual result of this case was, the next slide goes to Montez, but just to put a sort of coda on the LULAC case, the eventual result of that was that the particular line in question needed to be redrawn. So the entire map was not thrown out, but there needed to be adjustments related to that particular district. So another case that's kind of, I think, instructive here that demonstrates this idea in an assertion of rights under Section 2 is the Montez case. This is from Washington State in 2014. Here, there was a challenge to a particular city's at-large voting system that alleged that it deprived Latinos of the right to elect representatives of their choosing to the city council. The plaintiffs in that case noted that no Latino had ever been elected to city council in the 37-year history of the at-large system, despite the fact that from a proportional perspective, they accounted to approximately 1/3 of the city's voting age population, approximately 1/4 of the citizen voting age population. If you want to go to the next slide. And in this case, this is a quote from the case, which I think is important for all of you to see. This kind of talks about the standard that I think we'll talk about under Jingles. But it says that a plaintiff under Section 2 must make a prima facie showing that a block voting majority will usually be able to defeat candidates supported by a politically cohesive, geographically insular minority group. That really is a good, I think, summary of what sort of Jingles typically asks of plaintiffs. And again, we'll talk about that in further detail. But the application of the Jingles factors in this particular case, the court, when looking at those factors, said that the Latino population in the particular city was sufficiently large and geographically compact to allow it to form a majority of voters in a single member district. They then looked at statistical analysis using ecological regression, which is one way to do this kind of analysis, that the Latino population constituted a politically cohesive minority group and voted as a bloc. And then finally, that the non-Latino majority voted sufficiently as a bloc to enable it to defeat the Latino minority's preferred candidate. These last two bullet points are, I think, are a clear example of kind of the racial polarization analysis that you would have to do under Section 2. Then again, this is, you know, I perhaps maybe should have moved the refresher of jingles before this case, but as you recall from the jingles analysis, if the first portion of the analysis is met from a plaintiff, the court then looks to the totality of the circumstances in that particular situation, and then decides again whether there's a violation. In this particular case, they looked at the totality of the circumstances and concluded that there was a violation, mostly by looking at the city's prior failure to provide Spanish language voting materials and voter assistance, and systemic challenges in the city to Latinos electing candidates of their choice. So again, when you're looking at the totality of the circumstances, you're going to be looking at certain factors that are sort of beyond the racial polarization analysis. And again, we'll go through that in a moment. So what are the key considerations when it comes to Latino communities and redistricting? You know, we've talked about sort of the historic examples of discrimination in the state of Arizona, some examples of how some plaintiffs have asserted, you know, Latino voting rights, or felt that particular voting procedures or systems were discriminatory. But as far as takeaways go, for purposes of redistricting law, Latinos are treated like other racial or language minorities under the VRA and the 14th Amendment. In other words, the same legal principles guide the inquiry to Latinos as they would to other members of other minority groups. That being said, it's important to note that Latinos have a unique history of racial discrimination. Of course, they have a unique history in general. They also display sufficiently distinct voting patterns that will often distinguish their claims in a state like Arizona from minorities in other voting rights cases. So we've talked about that a little bit. There may be a distinction with Latinos in Arizona from, say, African Americans in the South. And then these trends and these differences inform application to the VRA and the drawing of majority, minority, and minority ability districts. Those two types of districts are, again, important under a VRA analysis, which I will explain a bit more. So the next portion of this is going to be talking about, again, kind of a refresher course of what the VRA requirements are. But I'll pause for a moment there to ask if there's any questions related to the sort of historical overview and some of those examples that I gave. And in particular, anything to the extent that we have a academic come to present to the commission, anything in particular you'd like for them to focus on that I've failed to do, which probably is a lot.
I thought it was excellent. A question that I still have is for an academic, if we can arrange it, is more the migration pattern. Where are the pockets in our state? How, you know, of the Latino community? How did they get there? Or were there certain economic drivers? You talked about being pushed into day laborers, jobs, and maybe just a little color about the attachment to the geographic areas that the Latino community currently lives in.
I think that, go ahead, Commissioner Lerner.
No, I was going to say that's of interest to me as well, to kind of look and see how things have changed over time with where people are settled and why they've moved around, the same kind of questions.
And I think in sort of reaching out to the academics in kind of the, I would say, sort of the scope of presentation, I think we're including that kind of information in our request to them. So hopefully they're able to present on that.
I had one other question that you may still be planning to address, and that is a little bit more local kind of issues that have occurred, legal. You mentioned, you know, you've given us 2 other legal cases out of state. Do you have some in state that you'll be addressing or could address, or they could address next time?
So I would say a couple of things to that. There have been sort of numerous instances of, and again, in a vote denial context of, let's say, Latino voting rights at issue. The clearest one, I think, is the Brenovich case, which we already briefed you on. There were claims in that case from Latino groups and Native American groups related to that particular voting procedure. But again, that's not a redistricting case, so that's not, why we've sort of brought it back to your attention. But that's a clear example of that. There was a prior, if we're talking about, again, vote denial cases, which are different than vote dilution cases, a prior lawsuit related to voter ID requirements in the state of Arizona that was brought under Section 2. But as far as redistricting goes, here in Arizona, primarily under the VRA, and we've talked about this, I think it was IRC 1.0, that was, really a question related to Native American voting rights, right? Which is, I think, slightly different than what we're presenting here. But I don't know.
In competitiveness.
In competitiveness, yeah. But I don't know if you have anything else to add.
No, there just hasn't been, at least in the modern era, has not been voter dilution cases that I'm aware of in the state of Arizona. We'll take a look, and obviously we have learning lessons from around the country, as Roy pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, you'll notice some of these seminal cases, particularly the LULAC case, 2006 case. Since 2006, we just have not had anything in Arizona that has been sort of a specific application of some of those principles. But, I mean, historically, there may have been more, but as we all know, the sort of state of redistricting law evolves. And so sometimes some of those historical overviews are not always particularly helpful, but we can take a look to see if we're missing anything that you need to be aware of.
Roy, it seems that many of the legal cases center around congressional district violations of Section 2. What do we need to know about legislative districts and our responsibility? And is there less focus there?
No, there isn't. In other words, under Section 2, which is designed to again prevent any kind of voting procedure, which includes or system which includes redistricting, from discriminating on the basis of race, that would apply to legislative districts, congressional districts, city districts. The LULAC case, for example, I'm sorry, the Yakima case, the Montes case, that's a city case, right? It's a municipal case where we're still applying the same Section 2 principles in that kind of context. So for your purposes, considering the legislative and the congressional lines, you're going to be looking at the same requirements under the VRA.
Thank you.
And unless there's other questions, I'll just actually turn to the VRA and kind of provide that refresher that that I wanted to do before we get into maybe some more of the specifics. So if you're going to go to the next slide. The next slide is a slide that we've used before the commission, but again, I think it's kind of a good overview. This chart, which demonstrates the requirements under Section 2 and under Section 5 and compares them. As I have already mentioned, and we've mentioned before, Section 5 is no longer applicable. We do not have the pre-clearance process anymore here as a result of the Shelby County case, and that is because Section 4's coverage formula is no longer operable. Nevertheless, I think it's important it may be important to still consider some principles under Section 5 or Section 2, but also I think it's a good demonstration of the requirements under Section 5 and how they compare to Section 2. We have this quote from a law school, an academic textbook that I think is an interesting way to look at it, which is describing Section 2 as a legal sword that enables minority voters to improve their electoral position. That is to say, under Section 2, someone could bring a challenge, a private right of action, or I'm sorry, a private challenge, essentially alleging that a particular redistricting plan discriminates. So Section 2 is that sword, and then Section 5, because it was a pre-clearance procedure, here is described as a shield. So what are the standards? Section 5, Section 2. Well, under Section 5, the standard primarily is a standard of retrogression. So in other words, minority groups may not lose ground relative to its prior position. So this is this idea that if there are a certain amount of representative districts, majority minority districts, having less of those districts could potentially be retrogression and therefore violate Section 5. Under Section 2, the analysis is whether a group's members have less opportunity than other members of the electorate to participate in the political process and to elect representatives of their choice. And this, again, will make some sense when we go through the jingles factors again. But again, it's really a question of opportunity and participation to elect representatives of your choice. That's what you're typically looking at under Section 2 in a vote dilution scenario. What's the scope of application? Again, we already mentioned this under Section 5 was only covered jurisdictions, of which Arizona was one up until Shelby County. Under Section 2, it applies to every voting jurisdiction. And this actually gets to your question, Madam Chair. Basically any kind of voting jurisdiction is subject to Section 2. Any kind of voting, system or process is subject to Section 2. Initiation of proceedings, pre-clearance would put the onus on the government. In other words, just like IRC 1.0 and 2.0 did, you would send maps to the Department of Justice and then they would pre-clear them or not. Section 2 is different, of course. There is no pre-clearance. It actually requires plaintiffs to bring challenges. As I mentioned, that's kind of the reference to the legal sword piece. If you want to go to the next slide. And then again, I already kind of covered this, but Arizona was a covered, this is related to Section 5, was a covered jurisdiction under Section 5 until 2013, the Shelby County case. This is the first redistricting cycle since the end of pre-clearance. That has introduced some uncertainty, and we say here in the third bullet point, while Section 5 no longer applies, a court could potentially consider retrogression as evidence of vote dilution in violation of Section 2, so long as it's supported by data. I think the important piece there to note is that what we put here, I think in the parentheses, is that the concept hasn't been tested yet, right? I mean, we are in the first redistricting that has occurred after the Shelby County decision, and so there's some unknown, I think, on sort of the application of Section 5 principles to Section 2 claims, but it is worth considering. So the next slide here gets into, the next few slides actually get into the definition of two different types of districts. The first are majority minority districts, and the next are what I would call ability districts, or actually, excuse me, not ability districts, but minority ability districts, that's right. I was getting that confused with performance, which we'll also talk about in a moment. But both majority minority and majority ability districts are important sort of definitional pieces to understand when doing a VRA analysis. And I'll talk about why when we get to the jingles test. But first, let's try to define them so you guys have a clear understanding of what they are. And again, this is a refresher, so you may have already remembered this from prior presentations. But when it comes to majority minority districts, we're dealing with a situation where a particular minority group makes up 50% plus one majority of the district's voters. As we have here in the next bullet point, it probably, when you're doing that sort of percentage calculation, it probably must be CVAP, or citizen voting age population, not just voting age population. There can be some differences between the two, and as we've seen with Latinos, sometimes that the Latino community, that sometimes difference can be somewhat stark. Now, we put probably in here because some courts have been sort of cavalier in what population or voting population they're using for their analysis. But from our sort of view of the case law, it is CVAP that is the primary consideration when doing a majority minority district calculation. But again, there's some sort of strangeness, related to how courts have described their calculations. The Department of Justice, and actually before I turn to this third bullet point here, which deals with how do you treat multiracial voters. One thing to mention here is the Department of Justice has released particular redistricting guidance. And of course, this is Department of Justice guidance. It's sort of how they are viewing redistricting. And in particular, they've touched on sort of how they're viewing both vote dilution claims and racial gerrymandering claims. And then in addition to that, they issued guidance, which we're putting forth here, related to how you treat multiracial voters. You may have seen some news reports that the census, at least from what I've seen in media reports, and this is just the media reporting it, not fact necessarily, that there have been an increase in voters that have identified themselves as multiracial in this prior census. So the question here is, well, how do you count that when you're dealing with calculating a majority minority district? The DOJ in their instructions have said that they count multiracial voters who identify as white in some other minority category as members of the minority. So for multiracial voters who identify as members of two or more minority categories, the DOJ practices how do you say that word? I've been having trouble all over. Iterative.
Yeah.
We were joking about this yesterday because it's been a difficult word to say for me and Daniel. Iterative allocation. But the point to that is that they will analyze them as members of each relevant minority group one at a time. So again, two different situations. You've got a multiracial voter who is white and one other racial group. or minority group, I should say, they're counted as that minority group under the DOJ guidance. And then if you are a member of multi-minority, if you're, a multi-race, or if you're identifying as multi-race, in other words, part of two different minority groups, that'll be treated as iterative. So you'd be, kind of going in order and counting which group you're part of. So again, that's the DOJ guidance that they've released, and that's actually based on prior census guidance that was released back in 2000. So again, this is majority minority. Now we're at defining minority ability districts. So what are we talking about here? Well, here we're talking about a situation where a particular minority group is typically able to elect its preferred candidate, either with the help of white voters, those are crossover voters here, or voters of a different minority group. It's a coalition. So you would have two minority groups combining to elect their preferred candidate in a coalition setting, or you would have a minority group combining with white voters to select the minority's preferred candidate in a crossover setting. How do you determine, whether that kind of district exists? That requires complex expert analysis of group voting patterns, electoral participation, election history, and voter turnout. That is something, again, that the map drawers and, of course, the legal team with our experts can help you in calculating, because it is complex. So why do we care? Well, actually, and then let me do a distinction here between the two, because I think this is an important point to sort of think about. We've talked about majority minority districts, which is the 50% plus one districts. For majority minority districts, they are usually also what we would call ability districts, but not always. So when we refer to ability here, again, what we're talking about is a minority group having the ability to elect its preferred candidates. Now, if you're doing a calculation of majority minority districts using CVAP, you can have a slightly majority minority district by CVAP, but may not still have an effective minority ability district due to disparities in voting patterns or access. So what we're getting at there really is, if you're doing a calculation using CVAP, the number that you get from that calculation might show majority minority, but if you look at voting patterns, turnout, for example, that might not necessarily result in that minority group electing the candidates of their choice. For example, if they have low turnout, that may not be the case. And so we, again, sort of refer to the experts here to say that experts can help determine whether a higher minority CVAP threshold may be required to ensure that the group can elect its preferred candidate in a particular district. And again, that's the difference between ability and then just the sheer CVAP calculation for a majority minority district. So comparing the two, majority minority districts come in play in the Jingles framework for determining vote dilution under Section 2. I'll talk about that when we talk about the framework. Nevertheless, minority ability districts may be important under both sections, Section 2 and Section 5. They were particularly relevant under Section 5 for determining retrogression. But again, we have this sort of unknown here related to sort of the application of Section 5 to Section 2. So let's talk about Jingles, the Jingles framework. So as we mentioned before in prior advice, in prior presentations, Jingles is a multi-step test that a plaintiff in a particular Section 2 challenge would have to go through and prove to establish that there's been a violation. So the step one is the minority group capable of electing a candidate of its choice in some hypothetical district, so in a proposed district? How do you determine that? Well, there are three criteria. The first is that the minority group must be sufficiently large and geographically compact to constitute a majority in that hypothetical district. The second is that the minority group must be politically cohesive. And then the third is that the majority must vote sufficiently as a bloc to enable it to defeat the minority's preferred candidate. We will talk about all three of these in a little bit more detail in the next slide. But as you can see, as we have in this graphic here, the second and third prongs of this first step are what typically are called the racial polarization prongs. And we've talked again about, an earlier agenda item about the racial polarization report and racial polarization analysis. That is something that, using the data that we have, that again, Timmons and the legal team are going to be able to conduct that analysis for you. After the first step is done, you go to the second step, which is the totality of the circumstances test. And that is, based on those circumstances, do the members of the minority group in fact have less opportunity to elect the candidate of their choice? That second step primarily looks at what we would call the Senate factors, which is basically related to the 1982 amendment to the VRA. It was the Senate report that was attached to that amendment that listed these factors that have become the factors that we look at under step 2 of jingles. So let's go to the next slide for a little bit deeper dive into these steps. As we mentioned, step 1 has 3 prongs. The first prong to step 1 is the question of whether there's a sufficiently large and geographically compact minority group to constitute a majority. The first piece of that is size, so it must be an actual majority, 50% plus 1 of CVAT. In this particular analysis, crossover votes from white voters do not count for this inquiry. So that sort of idea of crossover is not relevant to this particular prong. A coalition, which combines 2 minority groups, might count if it could be proved that those 2 minority groups are cohesive enough to be treated as one. A lot of courts say that that is actually unlikely, so that is not something that's very common, but theoretically possible. Second piece of this prong is compactness. And in this context, what we mean by compactness is the minority group sufficiently concentrated that a district can be formed while still respecting traditional redistricting principles like communities of interest and political natural boundaries. A district that combines far-flung and disparate minority populations may not satisfy this particular part of this prong. And we have an example here, actually from the LULAC case, where there was a situation where one group of Latino voters in the Austin suburbs were combined with another group 300 miles away in the Rio Grande Valley. The holding there was that that particular district was not compact enough. So that's the first prong. Let's go to the next slide to go to the second prong. The second prong is, again, related to political cohesiveness. That is, whether the minority group has expressed clear political preferences that are distinct from those in the majority. How you determine this is by analyzing actual voting preferences in actual elections. So there's a statistical analysis related to this. As we say here, expert statistical analysis is used using prior election results to make this determination. There are different methods, of course, for determining that. I think during the racial polarization report that Lisa Hanley did, I think she went through some of these statistical methods. But in this particular, the second prong, which is the first prong of racial polarization, you would need to use statistical analysis. There is no set quantitative threshold for how cohesive a group must be. Experts have kind of different ranges that they look at. We set forth here that some experts have used cohesion thresholds of 60 or 67%. In practice, cohesion could often be much higher, but it really, again, depends on the particular district that we're talking about and going through that statistical analysis and expert analysis. Let's go to the next slide, which is the third prong of step 1. Here, we're talking about the majority. So we're talking about the white voting bloc. The majority must vote sufficiently as a bloc to enable it to usually defeat the minority's preferred candidate. Usually in this context means more than half the time. The minority, when we refer to minority's preferred candidate, what we're referring to is the one who would win if the election were held only among the minority group in question, but need not be a member of the group. So that's an important thing to note. This is a results-oriented test, kind of similar to the last one. There's no quantitative level of cohesion that is required. Discriminatory motives are irrelevant to this analysis. It's statistical analysis. But again, like the last one, there's not sort of a threshold that necessarily is set forth in stone. It involves, again, sort of statistical analysis and expert analysis. In the Ninth Circuit, the ability of a minority group to play kingmaker between 2 white candidates is less telling than its inability to elect primary or general election candidates from within the group against white opponents. So this is kind of a particular wrinkle in the Ninth Circuit. So again, that's something to think about when you're thinking about, whether this sort of kingmaker idea is more important than inability to elect. And obviously the Ninth Circuit has an opinion on that. As I mentioned already, expert statistical analysis is used using prior or looking at prior election results, and that's how you ultimately determine whether this third prong is met. So again, this is the second of the 2 racial polarization prongs when we talk about racial polarization. So let's go to the next slide. So those 3 prongs were all related to step 1 of the Jingles framework. A plaintiff in a section 2 case would have to establish that they have sort of met that particular step, including all 3 prongs. If a plaintiff is able to show that, then they can move on to step 2, which is the totality of the circumstances test. And again, in that situation, the question is, do the members of the minority group in fact have less opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice? And I mentioned before, we look at what's called the Senate factors in order to determine this in a totality of circumstances test. The Senate factors focus on the history and present effect of discrimination against a minority group, both in voting and elections and generally. And it's a long list of factors, which we included that in its own slide in a prior presentation. So if you want to look at them, we can resend that. But those are the Senate factors that you would look at under this piece. Also, it may be relevant to look at proportionality in this totality of circumstances test. In other words, whether the number of minority ability districts statewide is proportional to the minority group's overall statewide population share for an upper limit of the VRA's requirements. And it is important to note, though, that Section 2 does not explicitly require a state to meet proportionality. There's a lot of case law related to that, but that's something to think about. In practice, a minority group that satisfies the three-part test in Jingles Step 1 will almost always have already shown enough to succeed in Step 2. So in other words, if a plaintiff has shown, again, that the first three prongs under Step 1 have been met, 2 of the 3 are done through statistical analysis, then usually, and again, this is just in practice and what we've seen in prior case law, that is enough to show, the Step 2 or satisfy the Step 2 totality of the circumstances. So let's go to the next slide. And again, it's kind of an obvious point, but if both steps of the Jingles test are met, the minority group has proven vote dilution in violation of Section 2. The remedy in that case is that the state or the court must draw one or more actual majority-minority districts to remedy the violation, not just minority ability districts. So the result of a Section 2 violation would be the drawing of majority-minority districts, which is distinct from the ability districts that we've talked about. So let's go to the next slide. What about the 14th Amendment? We've also talked about racial gerrymandering in prior presentations. It's important to think about. The Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment prohibits states from drawing districts predominantly on the basis of race. That's what we typically refer to as racial gerrymandering. So when does that occur? Racial gerrymandering occurs when a state draws districts based on race to the exclusion of traditional redistricting criteria. The traditional redistricting criteria here are typically compactness, contiguity, communities of interest, political boundaries, et cetera. An example of this is a district that connects narrow and disjointed minority communities across a large distance may be a racial gerrymander. Again, because that would be drawn to the exclusion of traditional redistricting criteria. It's important to note that compliance with the state's obligations under the VRA is not racial gerrymandering. In other words, if you are attempting to comply with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, that act in and of itself is not racial gerrymandering. Now, one other thing to sort of think about when we're talking about racial gerrymandering, DOJ has released some guidance related to how it's viewing both racial gerrymandering and something that we didn't really talk so much about, but is still potentially a Section 2 claim, which is what we would call a discriminatory intent claim. The analysis there is somewhat similar to racial gerrymandering in that you would be looking at direct and circumstantial evidence that a map drawer basically used race as a predominant factor to the exclusion of traditional redistricting criteria when drawing a particular map. So that's just something to think about, but DOJ has their views on that in their guidance. So before we go into executive session and talk more about majority minority districts as it relates to IRC 2.0 and the grid map, are there any questions that the commissioners may have for us?
That was excellent and very thorough, and I'm presuming at some point that will end up on our newsroom on our website. That'd be a great resource. If there's no further questions, I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of obtaining legal advice to further implement and advance our understanding of mapping for majority minority districts.
This is
So
Vice
moved.
Chair Watchman, motion to go into executive session to discuss further the topic at hand.
Second by Commissioner Mill.
Okay, Vice Chair Watchman,
Aye.
Commissioner Meal,
Aye.
Commissioner Lerner,
Aye.
Commissioner York.
Aye.
Commissioner Newberg is an aye. With that, we'll move into executive session. Council.
This might be a good time to give the court reporter a break before we go in. So just
Okay, how about a 5 to 10 minute break, quick?
Five.
And anything else? Okay, with that, we'll move into executive session with our council and our core staff. Thank you. Okay, I think I see everybody around. Director Schmidt, yes, we got everybody? Okay, thank you for everybody's patience while we were in executive session. That was just a great opportunity for us to do a deep dive into the legal implications of the VRA and the majority minority districts. Will very much help us as we begin the mapping process. And so with that, we have already addressed agenda item number 9. We will move to agenda item number 10, discussion of future agenda item requests. We already identified the plan to discuss more broadly the listening tour or whatever hearings that we will have for the 30-day review period of the draft map. Anything else that the commissioners would like to put on our radar?
I think that we're potentially having that guest speaker that Roy mentioned.
Roy is working on securing an academic to give us further context in the Latino migration patterns, their political history. I don't think we have a date yet, but I believe that will be forthcoming.
And Chairwoman, I would suggest that if they're not available by next Tuesday, that we're not going to be able to do it. Because then we really start the detailed mapping meetings.
Yeah, you know what, Commissioner Meal, I hear what you're saying. You know, I have a slightly different perspective. I understand it's timely, but even after we do just a draft map, we have an entire, additional 30-day period where we're going to be hearing additional public testimony. We're going to be refining the maps. And so if it does kind of fill in some gaps in the knowledge and it can be done within, let's say, 2 weeks, 3 at the most, I don't know, it still may be relevant. Can we give Roy another just week or 2 maybe?
Well, actually, I agree with you that there is that gap while we're doing another round of public hearings where we're still going to have business meetings. And in that gap, yeah, that may work fine. I just wouldn't want to take up those days you just with great difficulty set aside for us to do the real mapping work. I wouldn't want to take up those days for more presentations, but you are totally correct that there are then other meetings before we start digging back into the final maps.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take a look and make sure it doesn't take away from, serious deliberation time.
Madam Chair, just
Yes.
really quick on that point. I think we'd be looking at either, as far as my conversations thus far with the academic, either on the 5th or the 12th to come in. Is there a preference? I mean, kind of given what Commissioner Meal said with the break, would the 5th be preferable or the 12th be preferable?
The 12th, we are not scheduled to deliberate. I believe that, I don't remember which commissioner's out of town. I'm presuming we'll have a business meeting. How do the commissioners feel about delaying this educational piece to the week that we don't have deliberations? I'm open to that.
I'm good with that.
I'm good with the 12th.
As well.
Okay, I'll shoot for that, Madam Chair, with the
Okay. Okay, anything else with regard to additional future agenda items? If anything comes up, feel free to reach out to the staff within, the next 48 hours, just sensitive to us getting the agenda posted in time. There's no other suggestions. We'll move to agenda item number 11, announcements. We are looking forward to our hearings. Today at 4 o'clock, we will be in Mesa, Yuma, and Window Rock. That begins at 4 p.m., but the public should be aware we expect to be there for several hours. So after work, please come. We will be there. On Thursday at noon in South Scottsdale, Casa Grande, and Sierra Vista. On Saturday at 10 a.m., we'll be in South Phoenix and Prescott. On the 29th, we're going to be in Northern Scottsdale and Tucson. And on the 7th, we'll be in Surprise, Flagstaff, San Luis, and Cayenta. So we're really excited to see everybody. And our next public meeting will be next Tuesday, the 28th. That was agenda item number 12. So we can move to agenda item number 13 unless there's any other further announcements. Close of public comments. Please note, members of the commission may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to any criticism, or scheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date. With that, we have arrived to agenda item number 14, adjournment. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Vice Chair Watchman. Adjourn.
Second?
Second by Commissioner Meal.
Okay, vote. Vice Chair Watchman,
Aye.
Commissioner Meal,
Aye.
Commissioner Lerner,
Aye.
Commissioner York.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Newberg is an aye. With that, we will adjourn, and I look forward to seeing my colleagues, the staff, and the public later today and over the upcoming days. Take care. Bye-bye.